What's up, everyone? Chris Yandel here for Channelfireball.com, and welcome to another edition of Audio Articles, where we bring you articles written by the top Magic the Gathering pros in audio form, so you can listen on the go wherever and whenever you want for free, Monday through Friday. We've also got a lot of really great content on YouTube, so head over to YouTube, search for Channel Fireball, and ring the bell next to the subscribe button. And if you're looking to make your listening experience easier, if you have an iPhone, ask Siri to play the most recent episode of Channel Fireball's podcast, and you're all set. Today's episode was written by Brian Demars. Brian's going to talk about Vintage and give you a crash course of the format. Thanks for listening today, and here is a Vintage Crash Course by Brian Demars. Last weekend, I attended the Power 9 Open in Roanoke, Virginia. Despite being a tremendous Vintage fanboy, I haven't followed the format nearly as much as I would like. I don't have the cards on Moto, and there simply aren't a lot of large events to attend. The lack of Vintage in my life is something I'm actively going to rectify in the coming weeks. While I didn't know exactly what to expect, I've played enough of the format over the years that I had a pretty good idea. I wasn't disappointed, and I seldom am when it comes to Vintage. I found a vibrant, interesting, and dynamic metagame and played tons of games that were interesting, tightly contested, and thought-provoking. Vintage is still great, but let's be honest, when wasn't it? In this article today, I'll be breaking down the basic pillars of the format, the deck that I played, and how I'm going to approach the format moving forward. The deck that I selected for the event was Aggro MUD, based on the belief that my understanding of the format would be lacking behind the more active Vintage stars who would undoubtedly attend. Vintage is often wrongly painted as a hee-haw turn one format, which couldn't be further from the truth. Tactics and play skill play a huge part in success, and I didn't feel comfortable inventing new tactics for a dynamic format I didn't fully understand. I knew Workshop well. I was one of the pioneers of the Proto-Aggro MUD list years ago, and the deck is basically the same strategy, but with significant upgrades from Kaladesh block. Walking Ballista, Foundry Inspector, and Chief of the Foundry. It was like I went to the App Store and updated my Aggro MUD app. Aggro MUD by Brian Demars, 7th place finish at SCG Power 9 Open. For lands, 4 Wasteland, 1 Strip Mine, 1 Tolarian Academy, 4 Mishra's Workshop, and 4 Mishra's Factory. For creatures, 1 Lodestone Golem, 4 Steel Overseer, 4 Arcbound Ravager, 4 Foundry Inspector, 4 Walking Ballista, 4 Phyrexian Revoker, 3 Hangerback Walker, and 3 Phyrexian Metamorph. For spells, 1 Trinisphere, 1 Thorn of Amethyst, 1 Chalice of the Void, 1 Mox Emerald, 1 Mox Pearl, 1 Mox Jet, 1 Mox Ruby, 1 Mox Sapphire, 1 Black Lotus, 1 Soul Ring, 4 Sphere of Resistance, 1 Mana Crypt. And in the sideboard, 3 Chief of the Foundry, 3 Null Rod, 2 Sorcerer's Spyglass, 1 Precursor Golem, 1 Tormod's Crypt, 1 Dismember, and 4 Grafdigger's Cage. Vintage has always had a vibrant and nuanced metagame, and positioning and planning are huge. Unfortunately, going into the event, I didn't really understand what the battle lines were. The fact that I was aware my inexperience was a liability led me to choose a known commodity that I did understand, the Workshop. There's something about that workshop. It's hard to go wrong with a classic. Shops in the metagame. Workshop is the easiest and most identifiable pillar of the format. It's a proven winner. I had access to the cards, so I started making composite lists. I was interested in a few Dominaria cards. Traxus, Scourge of Krug, and Karn, Scion of Urza. New and shiny things. I was able to play some great games. I thought Karn was terrible. I legitimately could not cast him the first 4 times I drew him in a row. Traxus Scourge of Krug was decent. I'd be interested in incorporating more in the future, but I went with the cheaper Hangerback Walkers instead. The group I drove to the event with wanted to check out the Old School Magic event on Thursday afternoon, a decision that proved pivotal in my tournament experience. I met Andy Marketon, Montaleo on Moto, the reigning North American Vintage champion and eventual winner of the Power 9 event, and we hit it off from the start. We were chilling on the patio of the bar and having a few drinks. He was very generous in helping me fill the gaps in my knowledge of the format. In fact, what started out as just a few dudes chatting on a patio turned into a straight-up Vintage compendium of about 15 people sharing ideas and perspectives. I learned more about the format from talking to these guys for an hour than I had reading about the format and studying deck lists for a week. I was certainly on the correct path. The main deck I built was only 1 card off from his, and my sideboard only off about 5 or 6 cards. But the changes I was able to make based on what Andy told me about the format were directly responsible for my strong performance in the event. The difference between a great sideboard plan and a medium one is straight up wins and losses over the course of a 13-round tournament. He and I shared the perspective that when it comes to workshops, vanilla is the spiciest flavor. Play the best cards, be as redundant as possible, and don't get cute. I noticed that there wasn't a ton of variation among the core cards of the deck, but the 6 flex spots and the sideboard had a lot of options. A lot of people played cute or innovative spice cards in these slots. Not I, said the fly. I also noticed when I was building my initial list that the better and more recognizable the player, the more copies of Phyrexian Metamorph they played. Even though it appears to be a flex slot card, I would consider these to be core cards that should not be fudged with. In Game 3 of my win-in round for top 8, my Paradoxical Outcome opponent was able to tinker for Blightsteel Colossus on turn 1 on the play. I was able to clone it and narrowly survive to win the game. There's a reason why the card ought to be considered canon. Workshop is the beatdown deck of the format. It has disruptive elements, but with Thorn of Amethyst now restricted, the deck is more focused on quickness than being a super redundant lock-you-out deck. Disruption isn't as effective at hard-locking people out as it was before. It's more of an annoyance that makes an opponent's options just awkward enough for the beats to break through. The tactics of the deck feel more like old fish decks than what I've experienced with shops in the past. A fish deck with workshops. The clock is also very quick. I had a turn 2 kill, which is absurd. The real advantage of the deck is the consistency of the powerful cards. The nut draws are more infrequent than the blue decks, which I'll get to in a moment, but there are less awkward and non-functioning draws. Most of my games were close, and I didn't blow people out very often, but the deck could grind and gave me enough opportunities to make plays that mattered to win matches. These were my matchups. Round 1, Shop Mirror, win. Round 2, Shop Mirror, win. Round 3, Eldrazi, win. Round 4, Paradoxical, win. Round 5, Jeskai Xerox, loss. Round 7, Jeskai Xerox, win. Round 8, Paradoxical, win. Round 9, Jeskai, loss. Round 10, Oath, loss. Round 11, Jeskai, win. Round 12, Paradoxical, win. Round 13, Shop Mirror, ID, and top 8, Shop Mirror, loss. My pairings were reflective of the field and the top tables. The event had way too many rounds for the number of players, which meant that I played nearly everybody who was in contention for top 8 on day 2 over the course of the event. It really was a 3-deck field. Workshop, Jeskai, and Outcome, which is fairly indicative of the pillars of the format. The most difficult matchup for Workshop is the Paradoxical Outcome deck. They're fast and make tons of mana, which allows them to easily function under the shop's depleted disruption package, find their Hercules recall, and execute their plan. The sideboard involves boarding into a mediocre Null Rod deck to shift the lines of engagement a little. Null Rod messes them up hard and takes away their edge and mana, which makes one sphere extremely difficult to navigate. The downside of boarding into Null Rod is that it hurts your strategy as well. Artbound Ravager, Steel Overseer, and Walking Ballista to name a few. One of the ways that we mitigate our own Null Rods when we board them in, and Null Rods from opposing Jeskai, Eldrazi, and miscellaneous hate decks, was to bring in Chief of the Foundry. Chief brings respectable beats under Null Rod, and is also a much-needed Workshop Mirror card for when you want to board out ineffective Spheres and Chalices. Another pillar of the format that really impressed me, Jeskai Xerox. Jeskai Xerox by Joshua Lalo, 4th place at SCG Power 9 Series. For lands, 2 Island, 3 Tundra, 4 Flooded Strand, 1 Library of Alexandria, 2 Polluted Delta, 1 Strip Mine, 3 Volcanic Island. For creatures, 1 Containment Priest, 1 Monastery Mentor, and 3 Snapcaster Mage. For spells, 2 Dak Faden, 2 Jace the Mind Sculptor, 1 Teferi Hero of Dominaria, 1 Black Lotus, 1 Mox Emerald, 1 Mox Jet, 1 Mox Pearl, 1 Mox Ruby, 1 Mox Sapphire, 1 Ancestral Recall, 1 Brainstorm, 1 Dig Through Time, 1 Flusterstorm, 4 Force of Will, 1 Gush, 2 Mana Drain, 4 Mental Misstep, 2 Swords to Plowshares, 1 Search for Iskanta, 1 Gataxian Probe, 1 Merchant Scroll, 1 Ponder, 4 Preordain, 1 Time Walk, 1 Treasure Cruise, and 1 Fire Ice. In the sideboard, 1 Pithing Needle, 3 Tormod's Crypt, 1 Containment Priest, 1 Rest in Peace, 1 Mindbreak Trap, 2 Pyroblast, 1 Swords to Plowshares, 1 Supreme Verdict, 2 Wear Tear, and 2 by Force. Jeskai is the quote-unquote good stuff blue control deck, and is positioned to beat both Outcome and Workshops. Many of these lists even main deck Stony Silence. The deck draws a million cards, answers key spells, and eventually comes way over the top. The deck uses Dak Faden to quickly loot into powerful spells, gas up the graveyard for delve spells, flip Jace Vryn's Prodigy, and rinse and repeat. Jeskai tends to be more favored against Paradoxical because it has the edge in permission and is more nimble with Pyroblast for days after the board. I found shops to be favored game 1, but a significant underdog after sideboarding gives Jeskai access to tons of shatter effects, including Shattering Spree, Stony Silence, and By Force. It's basically like playing Affinity against Jeskai after sideboard. Difficult. From the workshop side, Mishra's Factory is the best tool for navigating their planeswalkers and dodging the sorcery speed Haymaker removal spells. The Chiefs are also a nice touch since they can help against Stony Silence. I had Spyglass for this matchup specifically and Dredge, but I stopped boarding it in against them. I felt like it just eventually got swept under the spree or by force and didn't add pressure, which is the most important thing. If the game goes long enough, they'll win. So you've got to make progress on the clock every turn. If they have the opportunity to take a turn or two to work on card selection without having to answer threats, they're going to come out on top and with a win. Paradoxical outcome. One of the biggest Vintage topics of the weekend was whether or not this card should be restricted in Vintage. I'm still on the fence, and I'll need to play more matches before forming an opinion, but it's a talking point in Vintage which speaks to the power and brokenness the deck is capable of. It's clearly very powerful and the defining deck of the format. Well, and MUD. Paradoxical Outcome by Stephen Quinn, 3rd place at SCG Power 9 Tournament. For lands, 1 Island, 2 Tundra, 1 Library of Alexandria, 2 Misty Rainforest, 2 Polluted Delta, 2 Scalding Tarn, 2 Underground Sea, 1 Tolarian Academy. For creatures, 1 Blightsteel Colossus, 1 Monastery Mentor. And for spells, 1 Black Lotus, 1 Mana Vault, 1 Mox Emerald, 1 Mox Jet, 1 Mox Pearl, 1 Mox Ruby, 1 Mox Sapphire, 2 Sensei's Divining Top, 1 Soul Ring, 1 Time Vault, 2 Voltaic Key, 1 Ancestral Recall, 1 Brainstorm, 1 Dig Through Time, 4 Force of Will, 1 Hercules Recall, 1 Mystical Tutor, 4 Paradoxical Outcome, 1 Repeal, 1 Vampiric Tutor, 3 Mox Opal, 1 Demonic Tutor, 1 Gataxian Probe, 1 Merchant Scroll, 1 Ponder, 4 Preordain, 1 Tendrils of Agony, 1 Time Walk, 1 Tinker, 1 Yawgmoth's Will, 1 Mana Crypt, and 1 Balance. And in the sideboard, 3 Grafdigger's Cage, 2 Tormod's Crypt, 1 Mystic Remora, 1 Flusterstorm, 2 Hercules Recall, 1 Mindbreak Trap, 2 Kambal Console of Allocation, 1 Fragmentize, 1 Caracas, and 1 Island. Such a deck always exists in Vintage. Control Slaver, Mean Deck Gifts, Tezzeret, Steel City Vault, Mentor, etc. It's the current quote-unquote big blue combo control deck, a blue shell that utilizes all of the most powerful cards. Once it gains traction, the game ends. Obviously, this deck struggles with Null Rod, particularly Rod protected by counterspells, which is a big reason why Null Rod has again risen to prominence in the format and is even being played by other blue decks. The top tier of the metagame is a strange rock, scissors, paper where decks actually change their sign after sideboarding. Shops can be Rod or anti-Rod, etc., which is a very cool dynamic. I also don't mean to imply that the format is only a 3-deck show. Oath of Druids and Dredge are very real decks as well, and were perhaps underrepresented at the top tables from what I would have expected based on the Moto Vintage data. Maybe in the next tournament I'll have to have a few sodas with Brian Kelly and let him teach me how to Oath before the event. Despite the poor showing for Oath and Dredge, the fact that they didn't crack into the top 8, the archetypes are not to be taken lightly. In fact, a large part of my sideboard was dedicated hate for those matchups. Most seasoned Vintage players know to respect these decks and have a plan. Overall, I'd say that this particular event was probably the most fun I've had playing in a Magic tournament in several years. I'm not surprised. I always have a great time attending Vintage events. The format was great, and even more importantly, the people who play the format are great. I was super appreciative of several of the big dogs of the format taking the time to share their insights with me. After day one of the event, there were over 20 players who all went out for barbecue together, and it was an absolute blast. I cannot confirm or deny, but a sandwich may have been punched. If you get that reference, you are old school Vintage for sure. It's an expensive format to play in real life, but the memories are priceless. Congrats to Andy for another dominant performance. It was great to reacquaint with many old Vintage friends, as well as meet and make some awesome new ones. That does it for this episode of Audio Articles. Make sure to head over to channelfireball.com and leave Brian a comment about what you thought about today's article, or you can hit him up on Twitter at BrianDemars1. Also, make sure to check out cfbevents.com. You'll find all the information about the upcoming GPs there. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us today, and I hope to see you soon. And until then, peace.